You know you're losing the war on adulthood when a piece of stationery has the power to ruin your entire Tuesday. This wasn't just mail. It was a brightly colored, aggressively folded declaration of war from the Homeowners Association. I'm Leo, by the way, and I live in the kind of meticulously planned, soul-crushingly beige neighborhood where if you dare to leave your garage door open for more than 10 consecutive minutes, a drone, probably piloted by Marjorie Petunia herself, swoops down to issue a warning. I pulled the document from the crisp, ivory envelope. It wasn't just a fine. It was a novella, a bureaucratic masterpiece titled Notice of Non-Compliance, Architectural Integrity and Safety, Case File LEO 478 SCD. I swear, they hire someone exclusively to make the titles sound like they matter. The amount? $500. The infraction? Minor concrete surface degradation. I had to put on my reading glasses, lean in, and inspect the attached photo. A high-definition, glossy close-up that could have graced the cover of Cracks magazine. And there it was. Not a crater. Not a sinkhole. Not the opening to the Earth's core. It was a single, 3-foot-long hairline fracture on the edge of my sidewalk. A crack that you needed a degree in civil engineering and a magnifying glass to even notice. I swear, Marjorie Petunia, the HOA president, must walk the entire development every morning wearing a pair of those jeweler's loops, armed with a tiny ruler and a perverse desire to enforce order on the geological process of aging. The crack had been there since I bought the house, a tiny, insignificant fault line. It was aging gracefully. It had character. The HOA called it structural deficiency leading to potential trip hazard and diminished property value. I called it a Tuesday. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my best friend, Dave. Dave is my designated emotional dumping ground for all things related to suburban tyranny. "Dude, you will not believe this," I said, pacing my kitchen, the HOA letter crinkling menacingly in my hand. "Let me guess," Dave's voice crackled over the speaker. "Did Mrs. Petunia cite you for the wind blowing your Amazon box 5 feet too close to your mailbox again?" "Worse. So much worse. $500, Dave. $500 for a sidewalk crack that looks like a stretch mark on a very fit ant." Dave let out a low whistle. "500? Are they serious? Did you kick their new artisanal fire hydrant or something?" "No, it's the minor concrete surface degradation fine. Listen to this bullcrap. They attached a 3D rendering of the sidewalk, highlighting the crack in aggressive neon red. The letter says that failure to rectify this violation within 7 days will result in additional penalties and potential legal action." Potential legal action? Over a crack? I feel like I'm living in a dystopian novel written by an interior decorator. Look, man, you just gotta suck it up and fix it. Go to Home Depot, get that gray crack filler, smear it in, and pretend this never happened, Dave advised, ever the pragmatist. I hate that you're right, but I hate the thought of giving Marjorie Petunia 500 of my hard-earned dollars even more. She probably uses the fine money to buy tiny, sequined uniforms for her Shih Tzu. This wasn't my first rodeo with the Petunia regime. My initial skirmishes with the HOA started innocently enough, a warning about my lawn gnome being out of character for the community's aesthetic cohesion. Then came the famous mailbox incident, where I was told my chosen shade of navy blue was 3 full shades too vibrant, according to the approved Sherwin-Williams palette. I had to repaint it in something called Muted Harbor Gray. My life, Dave, is Muted Harbor Gray. So I took Dave's advice, reluctantly. I drove to the big box store, bought a tube of gray concrete caulk, and a cheap plastic trowel. It felt like admitting defeat. That Saturday, I went out and applied the repair. I painstakingly squirted the goop into the hairline fissure, trying to smooth it over. But caulk is not concrete. It dried a sickly, chalky white gray that was about 3 shades lighter and way shinier than the surrounding sun-bleached concrete. It looked exactly like I had smeared cheap toothpaste into a gap. Honestly, the crack had looked better. At least the crack blended in. Now, the sidewalk had a brightly highlighted, clearly repaired scar. And of course, Marjorie Petunia was watching. She must have infrared sensors embedded in the manicured shrubs. The next Monday, the mail arrived. This time, the envelope wasn't ivory. It was a terrifying shade of institutional yellow. I didn't even have to open it. I knew. Notice of non-compliance. Failed attempt at remediation. The new letter title screamed in my face. The fine was now $1,000. They had doubled it. I read the new bullet points to myself in a flat, monotone voice, fighting the urge to throw the whole packet into my neighbor's prize-winning petunias. 1. Introduction of non-matching fill material. 2. Failure to restore the surface to original texture and color palette. 3. Continued presence of architectural degradation. Now highlighted degradation. Highlighted degradation. That was it. That was my boiling point. I was not paying $1,000 for a sidewalk that had been ruined by my attempt to fix a problem that didn't exist in the first place. I had 7 days. 7 days to call a professional concrete company, schedule the work, and drop $3,000 on a 5-foot section of sidewalk, or the fine would jump again. I'd be broke, and Mrs. Petunia would win. She would get her muted beige victory. I threw the yellow paper onto the counter and went into the living room to escape reality. That's where I found my 6-year-old nephew, Ethan, visiting for the weekend, sitting cross-legged on the carpet. He was a force of pure, unadulterated color, surrounded by a mountain of his favorite toy, Lego bricks. A massive blue-lidded tub of them, spilling out reds, greens, yellows, and blues onto the beige Berber carpet. He was currently building a majestic 3-story fire truck that had a purple ladder. I stood there, staring at the small plastic construction pieces. They were uniform. They were durable. They were perfectly engineered. They were designed to snap together, fill gaps, and create new, vibrant structures. I looked at the gray, chalky smear of failed caulk on the sidewalk outside my window. I looked at the HOA's draconian demand for a rectification. I looked at the massive tub of brightly colored, high-density ABS plastic. The idea didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It hit me like a slow-motion comedic epiphany, complete with a choir of angels singing an ascending, ridiculous scale. I'm filling the cracks, all right, I thought, a slow, maniacal smile spreading across my face. I never said with what. Ethan looked up, startled by my sudden, silent laughter. "Uncle Leo, why are you staring at the bricks like that?" "Ethan," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a promise of chaos to come. "Your Legos. They are about to become a monument to bureaucratic ridiculousness, a true act of functional defiance." The war wasn't over. It was just changing its colors. And the first battle would require a very specific trip to the hardware and hobby stores. If the HOA wanted a high-quality, durable infill that complied with structural integrity standards, I was going to give it to them. Just not in muted harbor gray. Not even close. I needed neon green and electric red. and maybe some transparent yellow pieces for maximum effect. This was going to cost me, but it wouldn't be a fine. It would be an investment in spite. The sheer lunacy of the idea, filling a concrete crack with interlocking plastic toys, was enough to make me feel alive again. It was the creative problem-solving the world desperately needed. But first, I had to confirm my financial reality. I had to prove that the proper route was so prohibitively expensive that my rainbow vandalism was fiscally justified. I found a local concrete contractor online called Rocky's Rock Solid Repairs. The name sounded like a cartoon character, which felt appropriate for the circus my life had become. I called the number, and a man whose voice sounded like gravel filtered through a cheap cigar answered. "Rocky's," he grunted. "Hi. Yes, my name is Leo, and I have a small concrete repair job. It's a crack on my front sidewalk, about 3 feet long, hairline fracture, really minor stuff." A long, heavy sigh came through the phone. "Sir, minor doesn't pay the crew. Where are you located?" I gave him my address, making sure to mention the HOA-controlled community. "Ah, Riverview Estates. Okay, look, here's the deal with Riverview. We can't just patch a crack. The HOA there is meticulous. If we patch it, and it cracks again, or if the texture doesn't match the pre-approved aggregate blend, they fine us, so we don't patch. We replace the whole slab. Minimum job size is 1 full 5x5 square." "Right. I understand the HOA complexity," I muttered. "So for 1 5x5 slab replacement, what are we looking at? Ballpark?" He paused, clearly typing something into a calculator that ran on cynicism. "Demolition, haul away, forming, pouring, curing, finishing, with the Riverview premium for dealing with the paperwork? You're looking at $3,000, minimum, maybe $3,500. Cash up front." I gripped the phone tighter. $3,500 to fix a crack that I could cover with a standard dinner plate. "You'd be paying for the HOA compliance, pal, and the guarantee that Petunia won't send you another love letter. Listen, I get it. Your HOA is a disaster. I just got off the phone with a guy who got cited because his petunia flowers weren't uniform enough. If you want it done right, $3,500. If you want a patch job, get the caulk from Home Depot and pray." "I tried the caulk," I sighed. It earned me another $500 fine and the title Highlighted Degradation. Rocky actually laughed. A dry, hacking sound. "Highlighted Degradation. That's a new one. Look, you got my number. $3,500. Think about it. Have a solid day, Leo." Click. $3,500. I was already down $1,000 in threatened fines. The cost-benefit analysis was clear. I could either surrender 3 months of my savings to Rocky and the beige overlords, or I could spend a fraction of that on construction toys and industrial-grade epoxy. The choice was obvious. The choice was chaos. The procurement process became my mission. This wasn't just buying toys. It was strategic supply chain management for a low-grade architectural insurgency. My first stop was the hobby shop, not the big box store. I needed specialized material. I bought 2 massive containers of industrial-grade, clear structural resin. This wasn't the stuff you use to glue a broken vase. This was the 2-part, smell it from a mile away, cures harder than diamond epox used for boat repair and serious construction. If the HOA wants durable, I'll give them nuclear-grade durable. Then came the bricks. I knew my nephew Ethan wouldn't appreciate me dissolving his fire truck into my sidewalk, so I had to buy new. I needed volume, and I needed color. I drove to 3 different retail stores across town, feeling like a low-level drug dealer making drop-offs, except my product was pure joy and architectural disobedience. I only bought the fundamental, high-visibility colors, bright red for the passion, electric blue for the cool detachment, neon green for the sheer fluorescent spite, construction yellow for the warning. At the third store, the cashier, a bored-looking teenager named Kayla, scanned the last tub, which contained maybe 1,500 bricks. "Building something cool?" she asked, without looking up. "The coolest thing I will ever build, Kayla," I said, leaning in conspiratorially. "A permanent structural solution to a bureaucratic problem." "Right," she said, finally looking up at the sheer volume of plastic rectangles. "It's always the random tubs of primary colors, never the themed sets. You do you." "I am doing me, Kayla. I am doing me hard." When I got home, I tallied the costs. 3 large tubs of high-quality bricks, specialty 2-part epoxy, mixing sticks, and heavy-duty nitrile gloves. Total outlay, $385. $385 versus a potential $3,500 plus $1,000 in fines. The financial decision was sound. The sanity of the decision was still pending. Back in the garage, I laid out my materials: the resin, the bricks, and the HOA's threatening yellow letter, which I was using as a coaster for my mixing cup. The plan began to solidify, moving from an abstract, funny thought into a concrete, meticulously detailed engineering project. The original crack was long and thin, almost a straight line. But then I looked closer at the sidewalk. There were other tiny imperfections. A small chip where the delivery guy had dropped a package, a little divot from a misplaced pebble. If I was going to do this, I needed to preemptively address all potential degradation. I decided I wouldn't just fill the main crack. I would create a jagged, branching mosaic that stretched 5 feet down my property line, turning the sidewalk into a vibrant, abstract map of suburban angst. I realized with a giddy, terrifying rush that this wasn't just a fix. This was a statement. This was my Mona Lisa of petty rebellion. And it was going to be permanent. I needed to let the HOA know, without any ambiguity, that this structural fix was not coming out. Not now, not ever. The epoxy guaranteed it. I spent the rest of the afternoon sorting the 6,000 bricks into color piles: red for fire, blue for water, green for growth, yellow for cautionary tales. And they would all be locked forever into a slab of concrete, a permanent, visible monument to the moment Leo decided that enough was enough. The beige had to go. The colors were coming. And they were coming tonight. Midnight. The hour of chaos. I checked the HOA community calendar. No late-night meetings, no scheduled power walks by the board. Just the hum of air conditioning units and the distant, judgmental hoot of an owl. Perfect. I suited up in my heavy-duty nitrile gloves. I wasn't about to risk bonding my hand permanently to the sidewalk in a fit of architectural vengeance. I also put on my construction headlamp, which made me look like an overzealous spelunker, and loaded my gear into a wagon. The 3 tubs of sorted Legos, the 2 cans of 2-part epoxy, mixing cups, and a few wooden dowels for pushing the bricks into place. I set my phone to play the mission. Impossible theme on a loop, very quietly, just for atmosphere. The first step was cleaning the crack. I used a thin wire brush and a can of compressed air, meticulously clearing out the dust and grit. This was serious prep work. The foundation of Defiance must be clean. Then the mixing. I opened the epoxy cans. The smell hit me immediately, a sharp, chemical, industrial aroma that screamed, "This is serious and permanent." I mixed the two parts in a plastic cup. The mixture immediately began to warm, a tiny exothermic reaction promising eternity. I started with the main crack, the one that cost me $1,000. Using the dowel, I carefully squeezed the viscous, honey-like resin into the fissure. It settled slowly, creating a clear, sticky trench. The moment of truth? The bricks. I reached for the neon green pile. I began carefully pushing the bricks, one by one, into the resin-filled crack. Click. It wasn't a click from the bricks locking together, but the satisfying thunk of a 2x4 brick settling perfectly, flush with the concrete surface. The resin wicked up the sides, totally encasing the bottom 2/3 of the plastic cube. The bricks, spaced slightly to fill the irregular gap, created a shimmering, bright green path where only gray decay had been. I worked methodically, the headlamp illuminating my section of sidewalk like a surgical theater. Green transitioned to electric blue, which then spiraled into construction yellow around a small chip I'd never even noticed before. The sheer volume of concentrated color was visually stunning and utterly wrong in this neighborhood. "Take that, muted harbor gray," I muttered, pressing a bright red brick into a particularly stubborn corner. The beauty of the Lego was the precise geometry. I wasn't just pouring filler. I was creating a tessellation. I used thin, single-width plates to fill the narrowest parts of the fracture and stacked doubles or triples in the wider sections, ensuring the top surface was smooth and flush with the concrete, critical for avoiding the trip-and-fall hazard claim. This wasn't haphazard. This was structurally sound, high-density ABS plastic aggregate, sealed with industrial-grade epoxy. It was functionally perfect, aesthetically criminal. The work was meditative and manic. The only sounds were the quiet click-thunk of plastic meeting stone and the very faint heroic sound of the mission. Impossible theme. 3 hours in, my back ached, my knees were dirty, and my entire 5-foot section of sidewalk looked like a rainbow zipper had been sewn into the concrete. Finally, I ran out of cracks to fill. I had preemptively addressed every tiny micro-imperfection on my section of the sidewalk. I pulled off my gloves, wiped the sweat from my brow, and stood back. The resin was already firming up, hardening the bricks into an immovable, immutable part of the sidewalk. I looked at my creation. It was beautiful. It was obnoxious. It was everything Marjorie Petunia hated, sealed for eternity. I packed up my supplies, took a triumphant swig of cold water, and went to bed, knowing the sun would rise on a new era of Riverview Estates. One brick at a time. I woke up before my alarm, not from guilt, but from sheer giddy anticipation. I needed to see it in the daylight. I threw on a robe and slippers and crept out to the front door, pulling it open slowly like a curtain on a stage. Sunrise. The HOA's nightmare. In the soft, early morning light, the sidewalk was blinding. The colors, the reds, blues, greens, and yellows, didn't just stand out. They vibrated against the dull, sun-bleached concrete. It wasn't a repair, it was street art. A functional, load-bearing, permanent, and utterly inappropriate mosaic. A zigzagging, abstract map of my personal breakdown. I knelt down and ran my finger over the surface. Perfectly smooth. Perfectly flush. The high-density plastic and the crystal-clear epoxy were locked together. A bulldozer might struggle to remove this. Magnificent, I whispered. Utterly, wonderfully magnificent. I stood there for a few minutes, just savoring the victory. The morning was silent, save for the distant sound of a leaf blower starting up. It was the calm before the storm. I knew Petunia would be here soon. She was predictable, like a geological event you could set your watch by. Then came the first sign of life. Mr. Henderson from across the street, an old man who usually spent his mornings reading the paper and judging silently, walked his perfectly groomed miniature poodle. Buttons. He stopped dead in his tracks. I watched, ready for the confrontation. He adjusted his glasses, squinted at the sidewalk, walked 2 steps, stopped, and then slowly traced the line of neon green with the tip of his cane. He looked up at me. I gave him a nervous, defiant smile. "Leo," he said, his voice slow and gravelly. "That is certainly different. It's a compliance measure, Mr. Henderson. The crack is filled, structurally sound." He let out a short, surprised chuckle. "Well, I'll be. Button seems fascinated. He hasn't moved this quickly in years." He paused. "It's certainly better than that gray toothpaste you used last week. Have a good one, Leo." And he walked off, a small, knowing smile on his face. The neighborhood was waking up. A jogger stopped and pulled out her phone to take a picture. A woman driving her kids to school slowed her minivan to near stop to rubberneck. My driveway was suddenly the most interesting piece of architecture in Riverview Estates. I hadn't just fixed a crack. I had installed a landmark. I was enjoying my 3rd cup of coffee on the porch, watching the rising tide of amused foot traffic, when the black Lexus pulled up. The one with the custom license plate frame that read, "Architectural integrity is not a suggestion." Marjorie Petunia, the queen of beige, emerged. She was wearing a taupe pantsuit that looked like it had been molded from the finest, most judgmental concrete. She didn't walk towards the sidewalk. She marched. She stopped at the end of my property line, her eyes widening. Her carefully shellacked hair seemed to stiffen even further. "Mr. Peterson!" she barked, her voice tight with disbelief, projecting across the meticulously mown lawn. "What, in the name of all that is reasonable and architecturally sound, have you done?" I stood up, holding my coffee mug. "Morning, Marjorie. I've rectified the degradation, as per your notice." She took a single, slow step closer to the rainbow fissure, as if approaching a highly venomous, brightly colored snake. "Rectified? You've installed toys into the public right-of-way. This is not rectification. This is an act of hostile vandalism." "Vandalism?" I feigned shock. "Marjorie, please. Let's stick to the terms in the covenants. Your last notice cited me for failure to restore the surface to original texture and color palette. This is technically superior. I used an industrial-grade, 2-part structural epoxy, far exceeding the tensile strength of standard caulk. The cracks are filled, the surface is flush, and the material, being ABS plastic, is chemically inert and highly durable. I've ensured the structural integrity and removed the trip hazard." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the line of electric blue blocks. "But they are blue, Leo, and red, and that ghastly retina-searing green." "Ah, color. Now we're talking aesthetics, not compliance," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Show me the bylaw, Marjorie. Show me the specific article in the Riverview Estates Architectural Handbook that dictates the acceptable hue range of subterranean crack infill aggregate." Her eyes darted around, searching for a legalistic loophole. "The bylaws clearly state all exterior modifications must be approved by the board to maintain a harmonious community aesthetic." "And what is more harmonious than the spectrum of light, Marjorie? What is more fundamental to creation than primary colors? Furthermore, I leaned forward slightly, adopting my most annoying tone of informed superiority. The original fine, the $500 fine, was for degradation. My repairs eliminate the degradation. If you fine me now, you are fining me for successful remediation, which I believe constitutes retaliatory enforcement under Section 4, subsection B of our community bylaws, which I read while trying to figure out what color my mailbox should be. She sputtered, her cheeks flushing beneath her foundation. I don't need a specific bylaw, Leo. Common sense dictates that a public sidewalk cannot be filled with children's playthings. If it's a public sidewalk, then why is the HOA fining me for its repair? If it's my property, then I've simply installed a permanent protective measure that, incidentally, is a vibrant new form of public art. It's called kintsugi, the art of repairing breaks with gold. I used Legos. Call it bricksugi. Stop trying to rename this. This is a clear, flagrant violation of every aesthetic standard we uphold, she hissed. Consider this your final warning, Mr. Peterson. If these childish blocks are not excavated and replaced with approved concrete filler within 48 hours, the fine will be tripled, and you will be issued a summons for an emergency architectural compliance review hearing. Do you understand the severity of this? I nodded slowly, putting my coffee mug down. Perfectly. I'll expect the summons, Marjorie, and I look forward to making my case. But just for the record, I suggest you try prying out just one of those red bricks. I'd love to see the look on Rocky's face when he quotes you the removal cost. She turned on her heel, her pantsuit rigid with indignation, and sped back to her Lexus, nearly running over Buttons the poodle in her haste. The immediate aftermath was chaotic, joyful, and completely validating. I went back inside to tell Dave about the confrontation, but my phone started buzzing before I could dial. Texts and social media notifications exploded. Text from Dave. Dude, I'm 3 towns over and the picture of your sidewalk is on the community Facebook page. You're a legend. Is Petunia okay? Did she spontaneously combust? Facebook comment. Neighbor, Carol. Finally, someone did it. The sidewalk has more personality now than the entire HOA board. Hasta Lego Leo. Next door post. Urgent. Architectural compliance alert. Neighbor at 478 is using unapproved foreign material, brightly colored plastic, in sidewalk repair. This sets a dangerous precedent for future non-conformity. 157 laughing emojis in the comments. I walked back outside. The morning had turned into a community viewing. A cluster of kids, about 8 years old, was gathered around the sidewalk, squatting down, pointing. Look, one kid shouted. It's a secret path. I bet the blue ones are for water and the red ones are lava, another hypothesized, already weaving a narrative around my spite project. I watched, unseen from my porch, as the children, the purest, least beige residents of Riverview Estates, found genuine joy in my act of rebellion. Even some of the nervous, beige-loving adults were taking photos, but they were being sneaky about it, pretending to be tying their shoes while aiming their phone cameras. I saw Mrs. Chen, who never speaks above a whisper, snap a quick photo, and then quickly shuffle away with a nervous giggle. The tide was turning. I realized I hadn't just stuck it to the HOA. I had injected a much-needed dose of vibrant, structural absurdity into the neighborhood's bloodstream. I was no longer Leo Peterson, the guy with the slightly too vibrant mailbox. I was Leo Peterson, the guy who permanently won the war on cracked concrete using children's toys and industrial-strength resin. The summons was coming, but I didn't care. I had my defense, I had my structure, and I had the neighborhood kids weaving tales of lava and water across my newly famous rainbow sidewalk. The $3,000 fine was a small price to pay for this level of personal satisfaction. Marjorie Petunia, as predicted, was nothing if not thorough in her escalating madness. Her preferred method of warfare was bureaucratic attrition, but when that failed, she leveraged the system. Her next move was brilliant in its petty vindictiveness. She called the local non-emergency police line, reporting the Lego sidewalk as a genuine public safety nuisance and a massive trip-and-fall hazard. I was in my home office, trying to draft my defense for the inevitable HOA hearing, a document that was rapidly evolving from a legal brief into a performance art manifesto, when the sound of a siren, blessedly muffled, cut through the quiet suburban afternoon. It wasn't a crime siren. It was the soft, apologetic whoop-whoop of a bored patrol car. I peered out the window. Sure enough, a city police cruiser was idling by my curb, the light bar blinking like a slow-motion rave. 2 officers got out. The first was Officer Reynolds, a seasoned guy in his late 40s with a tired mustache and the look of someone who had seen it all and regretted most of it. The second was Officer Miller, a very young rookie, still too nervous to slouch, who looked utterly perplexed just standing near my curb. I put on my most welcoming, non-criminal smile and walked outside. "Officers, can I help you?" I asked, approaching the pair. Officer Reynolds adjusted his utility belt and sighed heavily. He looked less like a law enforcement officer and more like a man contemplating early retirement due to excessive paperwork involving lawn gnomes. "Mr. Peterson, we received a complaint of a potential safety violation, specifically a public nuisance and tripping hazard on the sidewalk here at 478, Reynolds said, his voice flat. He refused to look at the sidewalk. He kept his eyes fixed on my face, probably to avoid acknowledging the situation's reality. Officer Miller, however, was staring. He was staring hard at the bright neon green and electric blue infill. He looked like he was fighting a losing battle against a laugh. "Right, the sidewalk degradation," I confirmed cheerfully. "Let me show you the hazard. It's actually a model of safety compliance." I led them to the spot. Reynolds finally glanced down, grimacing. Miller actually took a step back, hands clasped behind him in an attempt to maintain military composure. "Sir," Reynolds started, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The complaint specified unapproved foreign material installed in the public right-of-way that could cause a pedestrian to stumble. Are these Legos, Mr. Peterson?" "They are, officer," I said proudly. "High-density ABS plastic construction blocks, secured with industrial-grade 2-part structural epoxy, and this is precisely where my defense begins. Please, feel free to inspect." Reynolds hesitated, then knelt down, a slow, creaky process. He pulled a small, official-looking pen light from his pocket and illuminated the mosaic. "They're quite flush," he admitted reluctantly. He ran a gloved finger across the surface. "There's no lip, no raised edge." "Exactly," I crowed. "The original hairline crack, as cited by the HOA, constituted a degradation and a potential trip hazard because it was a fault line. It was unstable. Now, it's a structurally reinforced seam, filled with non-porous, chemically inert material, cured harder than most grout. In fact, if you walk on it, you'll find it smoother than the original, weathered concrete around it." Miller finally broke his silence. "Sergeant, look at the yellow bricks. He's got some translucent ones in here. That's really bright." Reynolds glared at Miller, then back at me. "Mr. Peterson, let's be serious. This is, at the very least, an aesthetic violation, And while the police department doesn't enforce HOA covenants, we do respond to public safety complaints. Who filed the complaint? I have a strong suspicion it was Marjorie Petunia, the HOA president, who is upset because I fixed the structural problem she cited, but got in the precise shade of muted harbor gray she desired, I stated. The fine for the crack itself was $1,000, which has since been tripled for non-conforming architectural modification. I assure you, officers, this is a civil dispute over color preference, not a criminal matter of public endangerment. Reynolds stood up, his joints popping. He looked at the vast beige landscape of the other houses, then back at the little Rainbow River running through my sidewalk. "Officer Miller, why don't you check the tensile strength?" Reynolds suggested, a mischievous flicker finally appearing in his eye. Miller looked horrified. "Sir? With what?" "Try to kick one out," Reynolds said dryly. Miller, unsure whether this was a joke or a command, tentatively tapped a red brick with the toe of his boot. Thunk. The brick didn't budge. Miller gave it a harder nudge. Thud. Still solid. It's secure, Sergeant," Miller reported, straightening up. "It's like it's fused with the concrete." "Because it is," I chimed in. "Epoxy is serious business." Reynolds pulled out his notepad, shaking his head. "Mr. Peterson, I am officially noting that the sidewalk degradation has been filled. The surface is smooth and flush, presenting no obvious physical hazard to pedestrians. I will note in the complaint that this is likely a non-actionable civil matter regarding community aesthetics." He looked directly at me. "However, I strongly advise you to consider the aesthetic component. It's certainly bright. We're leaving now, but if we have to come back because someone actually trips over this, the nature of the situation changes." "I appreciate that, Officer Reynolds, but I have ensured structural stability. The rest, I'm afraid, is down to the subjective tyranny of the beige." As they walked back to their car, Miller looked back, giving me a quick, almost imperceptible nod and a smirk. Even the local police had to admit the method was solid, even if the color palette was a war crime. The police visit was perfect. It officially documented the repair as structurally sound and not a tripping hazard, which was critical for the upcoming hearing. It was the first piece of neutral, authoritative evidence I needed. The real comedy started an hour later. Rocky, the gravel-voiced contractor from Rocky's Rock Solid Repairs, pulled up in his beaten-up Ford F-350, the kind of truck that smelled of sweat, dust, and deferred maintenance. He didn't call, he just showed up. He parked on the street, got out, and walked slowly toward my sidewalk, hands on his hips. He wasn't mad. He looked professionally mystified. "Leo, is that a rainbow?" he asked, squinting in the bright sun. "It's bricksugi, Rocky. A permanent structural solution to a bureaucratic problem," I replied, quoting myself. He knelt down, just like the officer had, but with a different kind of authority. He pulled a sharp-edged metal tool, a small chisel, from his pocket and tentatively tried to pry up a 2x2 electric blue brick. He strained. He grunted. The brick did not move. "What in the... is this marine epoxy?" he asked, genuinely impressed. "Industrial structural resin," I confirmed. "Rated for boat hulls and bridge work. I didn't want any recurrence of degradation, highlighted or otherwise." Rocky stood up, brushing his knees off. He looked at me, a genuine grin spreading across his face. "You crazy son of a gun. Petunia called me yesterday. Said she was going to need an emergency removal quote, stated the material was easily lifted by hand. I told her my minimum tear-out job is $5,000 for this neighborhood." "And what's the quote for this specific removal, Rocky?" I asked, leaning in. He whistled. Oh man. To get this out without damaging the surrounding concrete? We'd have to use a thermal drill to heat the resin, then probably a diamond-tipped saw to cut the plastic, and then a pneumatic chisel to chip out the epoxy base. That's hazardous work. That's specialty equipment. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. I wouldn't touch this for less than $6,000, Leo. And I'd put a rider in the contract that says I'm not liable for whatever fumes come off that plastic when we torch it. You made a monument, pal. You didn't just fill a crack, you fortified it. So, to clarify, Rocky, I said, adopting my most professional voice, the cost to fill the crack with gray concrete was $3,500. The cost to fill the crack with high density ABS plastic and structural resin was $385. The cost to remove the ABS plastic and resin is $6,000, plus disposal fees. That's about right, Rocky conceded, shaking his head slowly. You know, I told Petunia you were trouble the first time I talked to you, but I thought you were just going to be regular trouble. This is artistic trouble. He looked around the street. You're getting famous, by the way. I had a guy call me from the next subdivision over asking if I could quote him for a pebble mosaic of passive aggression. I told him to call you. He pointed at the sidewalk. So what's your next move? She's definitely going to take you to the hearing. I'm going to the hearing, Rocky, and I'm going to present the 2 police reports confirming structural stability, the original HOA fine demanding rectification, and your quote that confirms this fix is exponentially cheaper, more durable, and more expensive to remove than the alternative. Rocky put his hat back on. I'd pay money to watch that meeting. Good on you, Leo. Just keep my name out of the official report, all right? I got enough trouble with HOAs. He got back in his enormous, loud truck, gave me a thumbs up, and drove away, leaving behind a faint scent of cigar smoke and a lingering respect for my structural ingenuity. The summons arrived 2 days later via certified mail, hand-delivered by a nervous young man who made me sign 3 different forms. The envelope was thick, much thicker than the previous letters. Title: Emergency Architectural Compliance Review and Remediation Mandate. Case File: Leo 478 SCD. Final Notice. Date of Hearing: Friday, 7:00 p.m. The last day of my 7-day grace period. Total fine to date: $3,000. Original $1,000. Fine tripled for gross aesthetic and architectural non-conformity and setting a dangerous precedent. Mandate: removal of all non-approved infill materials within 7 days of the hearing verdict. Failure to comply will result in a daily penalty of $500, placed as a lien on the property. It was everything I expected. A final desperate attempt by Marjorie Petunia to use her bureaucratic sledgehammer. But now I wasn't scared. I had the police's impartial report, Rocky's professional assessment of my fortification, and a community full of people, kids and disgruntled adults alike, who had found a new, colorful symbol of resistance. I photocopied the summons, highlighted the time and date, and slipped it into the manila envelope I was preparing for my legal defense. I was ready. Friday arrived like a trial date. I spent the day honing my defense. This wasn't just about the sidewalk anymore. This was about the spirit of Riverview Estates. I was fighting for the right to be slightly less beige. I assembled my exhibit binder. Exhibit A was the original $500 fine for degradation. Exhibit B was the $1,000 fine for failed remediation, the toothpaste caulk. Exhibit C was the official police report, which read, in the key phrase I had highlighted in aggressive neon green marker, "No trip hazard observed. Surface is structurally sound and flush." Exhibit D was Rocky's absurd quote for the $6,000 removal, juxtaposed against his original $3,500 quote for a conventional repair. I also printed out the community Facebook and Nextdoor comments. I wasn't sure if I could submit them as evidence, but I figured waving 157 laughing emojis in Marjorie Petunia's face couldn't hurt. Before I left, I called Dave one last time. "You ready for this, Atticus Finch of ABS Plastic?" he asked. "I'm ready to bore them into submission, Dave. My strategy is simple. Technical compliance plus fiscal responsibility equals victory. If they want to destroy a perfectly sound repair, they're fiscally reckless, and I'll use their own bylaws to choke them. Go get 'em, Leo, and if you win, you owe me a commemorative Lego brick, sealed in epoxy, of course." The HOA Emergency Architectural Compliance Review hearing was held in the multipurpose room of the community center, a space as beige and sterile as Marjorie Petunia's soul. The walls were painted creamy neutral. The carpeting was tawny buff. It was a beige bomb site. At the front, behind a folding plastic table draped with a taupe cloth, sat the HOA board. Marjorie Petunia, president, glowering. Mr. Jenkins, treasurer, elderly and sweating slightly, and Mrs. Albright, secretary, usually silent, scribbling furiously. The gallery was packed, word had spread. The spectators included Mr. Henderson and his poodle, sitting outside the door, the jogger who took the photo, and about 10 other residents, a mix of HOA loyalists who were there to watch me hang, and a collection of disgruntled neighbors who were there to see Petunia twitch. I took my seat in the designated defendant's chair, placing my binder neatly in front of me. The air was thick with cheap coffee and repressed suburban rage. Marjorie Petunia adjusted her microphone, an unnecessary gesture in the small room, and cleared her throat with the authority of a Supreme Court justice preparing to rule on a matter of global importance. "We are convened for the Emergency Architectural Compliance Review of Case File LEO 478-SCD concerning Mr. Leo Peterson's property at 478 Aspen Drive," Marjorie began, her voice brittle with manufactured formality. "Mr. Peterson, you are here today to explain your gross, willful, and frankly childish act of architectural nonconformity. We will begin by stating the current violation: the introduction of non-approved, multi-hued construction toys into the concrete surface, resulting in a $3,000 fine and a mandate for complete excavation." She leaned forward. "Mr. Jenkins, the treasurer, will attest that the estimated cost of remediation, should the HOA be forced to hire outside contractors to correct this eyesore, has now been assessed at an initial $6,500 due to the specialized nature of the infill material." Mr. Jenkins nodded weakly, wiping his brow. "Yes, hazardous removal surcharge. Very expensive." Marjorie smiled, a shark sighting a crippled seal. "Mr. Peterson, your defense?" I stood up, holding my binder. "Thank you, Madam President. I respectfully submit that there is no violation, and that the fine levied constitutes retaliatory enforcement based on aesthetic preference, not structural deficiency or lack of compliance. Let us review the facts, chronologically, using the HOA's own documentation." I opened my binder. Exhibit A, the initial fine for a minor concrete surface degradation. This established the structural problem. The HOA demanded I fix the degradation, which you failed to do with your initial application of mismatched caulk, Marjorie snapped. Which leads us to Exhibit B, the second fine, tripling the penalty for failure to restore the surface to original texture and color palette. Madam President, you explicitly stated the issue was the crack and my failure to rectify the surface. I then took corrective and superior action. I placed the police report on the table, centering it so the fluorescent light hit the highlighted section. Exhibit C. I called the city police to conduct an official safety evaluation, anticipating your claim of trip hazard. Officer Reynolds documented the following. Sidewalk degradation has been filled. The surface is smooth and flush, presenting no obvious physical hazard to pedestrians. Structurally sound. I looked at Marjorie. The crack is filled. The degradation is mitigated. The trip hazard is eliminated. I have fulfilled the structural and safety requirements of your original notice. You asked for rectification. I delivered. Mrs. Albright stopped scribbling and looked up, confused. But with plastic toys, Mr. Peterson, this violates the aesthetic standards of our community. Are you arguing that kindergarten materials are an appropriate component for the exterior facade of a luxury home? Marjorie's voice rose in pitch. I am arguing that high-density ABS plastic and structural resin are superior, non-porous, and more durable crack-filling materials than standard concrete caulk. I used the cheapest, most effective way to secure the structural integrity of the sidewalk, thereby acting as a financially responsible community member. Speaking of finances, I placed the contractor quotes side by side. Exhibit D, the contractor, Rocky's Rock Solid Repairs, quoted me $3,500 to conventionally repair the area, paid for by me. My brick Sugi repair cost me $385. That is a 90% savings on a structurally sound repair. I paused for dramatic effect. Now I hear the HOA claiming it would cost $6,500 to remove my perfectly functioning, structurally sound, cheap, and durable repair. Madam President, are you truly arguing that the fiscally responsible course of action for this community is to spend $6,100 to destroy a $385 repair that the city police have certified as safe simply because it offends your personal color preferences? The audience rustled. A few gasps were heard. Mr. Jenkins started rubbing his temples. This is not about preference, Mr. Peterson. It is about setting a dangerous precedent. We cannot allow every homeowner to use novelty materials for basic repairs, Marjorie bellowed, ignoring the fiscal logic. But where is the bylaw, Marjorie? Show me the specific article in the Riverview Estates Architectural Handbook that says structural infill must be muted harbor gray or a color closely approximating the muted harbor gray family. It's not there. You are applying a subjective aesthetic judgment retroactively to a structurally compliant repair. The room fell into silence, broken only by the distant, muffled sound of Mr. Henderson's poodle, Buttons, barking twice. The HOA board looked utterly defeated, staring at the competing quotes and the police report. Marjorie Petunia, realizing she couldn't win the structural or fiscal argument, tried one last legal maneuver. Mrs. Albright, since the infill material itself was not submitted for prior approval, the entire modification is null and void under Section 2.4, which requires a material sample submission for any new exterior construction. Mrs. Albright, the quiet secretary who had been scribbling throughout the exchange, finally put down her pen. She was a middle-aged woman named Carol, who, I now realized, was the same person who had posted the "Finally someone did it" comment on Facebook. Carol looked directly at Marjorie, and the silence in the room became absolute. Actually, Marjorie, Mr. Peterson has a point, Carol said, her voice surprisingly firm. Section 2.4 applies to modifications and additions, such as patios, decks, or mailbox alterations. A crack repair, as originally cited in the HOA's own notice, is maintenance, not a modification. The bylaws require that maintenance eliminates the degradation. It does not require a prior material submission, provided the result is flush and non-hazardous, which the police report confirms. Marjorie Petunia's mouth dropped open slightly. Carol, that's absurd. Of course a repair is a modification if the material is wildly non-conforming. But the material is not addressed, Marjorie, Carol insisted, pointing to the binder. You never defined acceptable infill material for a fine fracture. You only defined acceptable aggregate for a full slab replacement. By issuing a fine demanding rectification of degradation, and then failing to define the acceptable material for that rectification, the HOA tacitly approves any material that performs the function of eliminating the hazard. Mr. Jenkins, the treasurer, chimed in weakly. And that $6,500 removal quote is going to put us over budget for the quarter, Marjorie. We can't justify that expenditure for what the police say is safe. The board was in open revolt. Marjorie was isolated. Furthermore, Carol continued, clearly enjoying her moment of revolution, Section 4.1 of the Covenants states that fines levied must be commensurate with the impact on the community and the reduction in property value. I submit that the $3,000 fine is disproportionate, given that the fix has eliminated the original violation, the crack, and, if anything, has drawn positive attention, judging by the local social media response. Marjorie was defeated. She looked like a statue carved from frozen sour cream. She picked up the gavel, her hand trembling. The board will deliberate in private for 5 minutes. 5 agonizing minutes passed, while the board huddled. The neighbors in the gallery exchanged triumphant glances. Marjorie returned, her face set in a grim mask of pure, unadulterated failure. The verdict is as follows, Mr. Peterson, she announced, her voice flat. The initial fine and the subsequent increased fines for the sidewalk crack degradation are hereby waived, effective immediately. The HOA recognizes that the structural deficiency cited in the original notice has been eliminated, and we must adhere to the external findings confirming safety. A wave of quiet applause rippled through the gallery. However, she quickly added, her eyes narrowing, the board finds that the introduction of high-density ABS plastic in the form of building blocks constitutes a significant deviation from the harmonious community aesthetic and sets an unwelcome, dangerous precedent. Therefore, Mr. Peterson is assessed a new, one-time, non-negotiable fee of $100 for non-conforming architectural modification. She banged the gavel with unnecessary force. Crack. And furthermore, Mr. Peterson is required to maintain the current installation in perpetuity. Any attempt to modify, replace, or alter the color of the plastic infill will result in immediate, non-appealable daily fines. Adjourned. I smiled. They had waived the $3,000 fine and instead charged me $100 for a permanent pass to keep the rainbow sidewalk. They couldn't win, so they made the maintenance of the absurd artifact mandatory, just to save face. It was the best possible victory.